and welcome to another evening of frank conversation here on Hard Copy, coming to you from our studios in Abuja. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. After weeks of anticipation, finally a ministerial list is out. And I say A because with 28 names, it's clear that the list isn't complete, as the Constitution requires that every state produces at least a minister, a requirement some analysts have said could be inimical to maintaining a lean and agile cabinet. Well, speaking of the list, as usual, note portfolios have been attached to the names, an omission which might leave senators no choice than to ask general interest questions while screening. But while the submission of a list might be a talking point for days, there's been pretty troubling news from some states which are battling with a myriad of issues. Apart from the removal of fuel subsidy, which has hit citizens in different parts of the country pretty hard, and the national doctors' strike, which is threatening to paralyze the health sector, the security sector is in dire need of attention too. A few weeks ago, villagers in Mongo local government, a largely agrarian community in Plateau State, were sacked from their villages when marauders struck, taking lives and destroying property. While citizens were coming to terms with the news, a lawmaker from Zamfara this week raised an alarm that Gusau, the capital of his state, was about to be overrun with bandits who are now attacking citizens and raping women in broad daylight. As if that was not enough, another problem reared its head, but this time in the southeast region. The Enugu state government had sealed up shops of some traders who seemed to have complied with a sit-at-home order allegedly imposed by IPOB agents who have been protesting the continued detention of their leader for close to 2 years now. The following day, the traders whose shops had been sealed up protested. It led to a confrontation and lives were lost. Well, my litany could go on, but the point is that there's work to be done and we all need to be brainstorming on how to get this work done. It's the reason I've invited my guest tonight. Jude currently works in the civic space and is the interim executive director of Center for Civilians in Conflict. Jude, welcome to Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me.
Well, rumor mongering is over with regards to the ministerial list. 28 names is what we've heard and seen so far. Any surprises for you?
Well, I'm not surprised. Because I think one of the perennial challenges we have in leadership in Nigeria is the balancing acts between the politicians who help people to get into power and technocrats who we need to do the job. And so looking at the lists, at least from a personal point of view, it doesn't inspire a lot of confidence. I would assume that given the very dire straits that the country is facing, that the focus of that list will be more about people who are going to come in with technical expertise to solve the problem, rather than the same lists of people who have been forever in government and whose track records are really questionable. Every time,
there's criticism as to the fact that there's been no portfolios assigned to these names, whether these people are really suited. Some people have argued, oh, they're just managers. Managers don't need to know everything. But sometimes people think that there should be some thought as to who is going, and then helps guide the Senate in terms of, or the Senator in terms of the questions that they should be asking these people. But it would seem that term in, term out, this kinds of criticisms just fall on deaf ears, or maybe the political expediency of it has not yet presented itself. Do you think we need to legislate on that as well?
The truth of the matter is that you have to give government officials the space to exercise discretion with the belief that they exercise that discretion for the best interest of the country. Nobody in this country would want to hire people in his organization and he will say, just come. I will interview you. I won't give you a job description. I won't give you a portfolio. I just choose you randomly and then figure out where I can fix you. Nobody does that. Mm. You need to know the job you have for this person, know the qualifications you're looking for that particular job, and on the basis of the job description, you're able to examine if this person is competent and would be effective in that role. And the National Assembly doesn't have the benefit of those job descriptions. And so it's going to be another comedy of errors where people come and recite the national anthem and they ask them to take a bow and all of that.
But let us look at some of the issues that have come up, some of them this week, others way before this week. Before now, we already knew that we had security challenges in many parts of the country. Something has been on the front burner for a while. Depending on where you look, every region seems to have its own peculiar challenge. Let's start with the situation in the Northeast. First, are you alarmed? Are you concerned by that sort of alarm coming from a lawmaker saying, look, it looks like the state capital is about to be overrun? This is despite the many assurances that we've been getting from the new chiefs and other security agents.
The truth of the matter is that our country has been in this terrible situation of insecurity for decades now. So we're getting numb to these alarms. So we've heard it before. People have been killed before in thousands, So we're at the point where this news doesn't trigger any kind of different reaction because we hear it all the time.
Which is dangerous, isn't it?
Which is very, very dangerous. Because the question I ask myself, and I guess some other people ask themselves, what is the price of life in Nigeria? What premium do we put on the lives of our citizens? You hear stories about countries who will get their army to go in to rescue just one person. But here, citizens' lives don't seem to matter a lot. So we're in a situation where the banditry, the kidnapping, the killings, the violence has endured for years. And every time we hear all these placatory speeches about something has to happen, something has to happen. But the average person who is experiencing this violence, who is experiencing this conflict, is not able to see the pathway out of where they are. Mm-hmm. And like I said, the question we need to ask ourselves is, what have we been doing to address this conflict, to address this violence? It obviously is not working very well. So what has worked? And what more can we do differently? Addressing conflict, addressing violence is not just about kinetic response or military response, as is often the default position here. It's also about understanding the underlying inadequacies and triggers that create an environment that makes it easy for people to decapitate each other and not have qualms about it. And I think from the point of view of the non-kinetic approach to addressing issues of violence, we've not done a very good job.
I know that, right now, that's where you're, working in that space, looking for the protection of civilians. I know that usually it's supposed to be in states of conflict when it comes to state actors. But when you look at situations like ours, where oftentimes the state is battling non-state actors, how do you come in? How do you intervene in those or how would you say that civilians be protected when oftentimes the other side, the, co-aggressors, so to speak, are oftentimes dressed in the garb of civilians?
I mean, the non-state armed actors and armed opposition groups, in the strict sense of it, are not civilians because, of course, they're bearing arms.
But they're not readily identifiable.
Exactly. So, but the thing I always come back to is, what is the purpose of the state? The purpose of the state is to protect the citizens of that state. The whole essence of governance, the reason why we came together and gave authority to government to ceded our powers to government to hold it in trust for us, is because we believe that they will take care of us. They will protect us. We will be at the center of their policies. How you do that means that you have to involve communities in conversations about their protection. So what we do in my organization is to ensure that we're able to engage with these communities in conflict, to give them the right kind of resources, the right kind of knowledge, the right kind of expertise to be able to articulate their protection needs and provide the forum for them and the armed actors, the military and the security agencies to be able to have dialogue, to understand the needs of both sides. and of course help the security agencies understand the obligation under international law and beyond just international law, the obligations as human beings to others. And I think in investing in the agency of communities in conflict empowers them to be able to be participants in their own protection, to be able to work closely with government, to give government the right kind of information, to work with government to address their needs. But what you see a lot of times is that communities and the military establishment or security sector are in conflict also, because there's this massive distrust across board. And oftentimes when these attacks happen, people in those communities become targets or are accused of shielding the culprits.
Aggressors.
So yeah, being able to build that bridge, in my view, and government understanding that they are in service of those communities, not against those communities, I think it will be important in dealing with the problem.
It's a difficult bridge to build, but it's not an impossible one. I mean, I'm taking a look at what happened in Enugu this week, and you have to come out on Monday. You must ignore this other, sit-at-home order, which has been going on for too long, which also challenges the authority of government. And then they say, if you don't, we're going to seal up shops. Following day, traders come, those whose shops were sealed up, very unhappy about the situation. And then they protest. It results in a confrontation, and lives are lost. And some people will say, what exactly has just happened here?
Full disclosure, I'm from Enugu State.
Okay.
And I grew up...
So maybe you might not be...
I grew up in Enugu. And believe me, my heart bleeds when I look at what my city has become. You know, that we are at the point where non-state actors are able to determine when law-abiding citizens and residents of Enugu will come out and when they will not come out. That the state somehow ceded its authority to these faceless individuals, and they are the ones calling the shots. And this has been going on for years. So it's not just something that happened today. So my heart bleeds because it's a clear example of failure of governance. However, people don't come out on Monday because they're scared that they will be maimed, that will be harmed. They don't sit in their houses because they don't want to work or because they're lazy. They sit in their houses because it's clear to them that the state capacity to protect them or state monopoly to violence has been compromised. So they choose to stay home. There is freedom of choice. People decide when they leave their house and when they don't want to leave their house. People decide when they want to do commerce and when they don't want to do commerce. So I think that whoever the Enugu state governor is talking to must have advised him wrongly. Because there are no reason, both in law and in practice, where you have to force people to come to their own private business. If he was enforcing this rule against government officials or civil servants who work for him, it's understandable. These are private businesses, and you're compelling them when they will or will not come to their business. And this is the overreach of the state that constantly happens, that the state does not understand the limits of its own power. So that is one. So from a legal point of view, this is a big mess. On issue of moral high ground, the same thing people were running away from, for which they don't show up on Monday in their shops, the same thing you have done. They were trying not to be killed by these armed actors, and you ended up killing them for coming out to say that they don't want to be killed by the armed actors. So as a governor, you've lost the moral high ground, you've lost the scripts, you've lost the trust of the people. And I think it is important that Governor Peter Mbah and his cabinet sit down and begin to find ways to repair what seems to be a very terrible mistake, irreparable mistake in my view. They have to find ways to repair it, to tell the people, you are not the enemy, and I've made a mistake, and I want to make amends. That's the only way he can regain that moral authority to even say anything about people sitting at home or not sitting at home.
So talking about Enugu again, some people have said, okay, for years now, these non-state actors have asked citizens to stay at home. For fear, people have stayed, they've complied. Now you have a state government, a new government, who's saying, I'm not going to take this. And we see this in many other southeastern states. In Anambra, we're seeing that, even in Abia, in Ebonyi as well. We're seeing that also in Enugu. The governors of the south seem to be dissatisfied with what is currently happening, and they want an end to this. And the citizens, some of them, is like they're taking baby steps to just, see what is happening.
As they should.
Yes, taking baby steps to see if government is serious. But then you now have citizens who are, government also saying, look, if you don't come out, it will mean that you're actually obeying these people. It will mean that you take their word over us. And this is going to be the punishment for this, if that's the path that you want to toe. We will seal your shops and you will not be able to do business. And citizens come the following day and say, we're dissatisfied. They actually do mobilize and do a protest. And then one will ask, why didn't they protest all of the time against the non-state actors? After all of them together, will certainly be more than the non-state actors who've asked them to sit down at home for years.
They didn't elect the non-state actors. They didn't.
The more reason why they should not give them so much power, you don't think?
Like I said, the primary function of the states is to protect citizens. Because what may happen is that people then resort to self-help. And it's just very chaotic. My point is, it's not for the state to compel people to come out. It's for the state to convince people to come out. That is where I have a challenge. I feel that nobody in this country should be able to make people not to come out on a Monday to do their work. I think it is totally unconscionable that that has even happened. But I feel that it's the role of government to convince citizens that, look, we're in this together. We've got your back. Come out. Now, ask yourself the question, how many of the victims of the atrocity of these non-state actors, how many of them do we know their names? How many of them did the governors go to visit their families to say, I'm sorry for what has happened to your family, it won't happen again? How many communities that were overrun by these people have seen their governors or their elected officials come and say, I'm sorry for what has happened? So we ceded the narrative to these separatists or whatever they call themselves, or non-government, We've ceded that to them. So that's my point, that the state, if the state wants to seize the narrative, it's not by compelling people, but it's by letting people understand that you're with them.
Well, the Enugu state government certainly has its work cut out for it. But, while we battle all of these internal challenges, we've been seeing in recent times that the ECOWAS region has been speaking quite strongly on democracy and how they will continue to do all in their power to uphold democracy. And shortly after that, 2 weeks ago, we saw Nigeria's president at the ECOWAS summit and also thereafter an AU summit. Then this week, we hear that there's been a coup in Niger. And ECOWAS is saying, we're not going to tolerate it. But when you look at what is happening, within the ECOWAS states, do you think that they are really in a place where they can say, we're not going to tolerate a coup in a place like Niger? Going away from...
Yeah. I think there is value in restating the principles that coup d'etat is not acceptable in our region. I think there is value in restating the principles. However, in my own study and observation of democracy in West Africa, coup d'etat are, in my view, symptoms of the problem, not the problem. There are incidents that lead up to a point where the military, do what they do. And a lot of times, those fundamental inadequacies, those critical malfunctioning of the states, those critical cases of exclusion are not addressed. And so the regional body sits there and overlooks all these other elements. When elections are rigged, when elections are manipulated, when constitutions are manipulated so people can be in power forever, all of these dynamics play out. And the regional body is not forceful enough to address these dynamics that lead us to a point where the military come in, and the people celebrate them, like we've seen in some West African countries. So, yes, it is important for ECOWAS to restate these principles, but it's also very important for ECOWAS to be a watchdog for democracy. Democracy is not just about election. Democracy is not just about a civilian being in power. Democracy is about a system that is actually sensitive to the voices of the people, respects those voices, works for them, includes them in the decision-making process, and works for their best interests. When these things are not happening, you begin to see the tendency to undermine a structure that may be democratic in name, but autocratic in principle. I'm not speaking about Niger now as a country. I'm just speaking about the general tendency and the framework within which these things are happening. So we need to do more. Democracy has to deliver on development. Democracy has to make you and I feel that we belong. When it is not able to deliver on these things, it allows a different and dangerous narrative that perhaps it is not the right kind of government, that perhaps we need something different. So because of our inability and failure and consistent dishonesty in the way we run democratic systems in the region, we are giving opportunity to people to undermine that whole concept and look for alternatives that are often destructive to the region.
Quite a thought there. I've just reflected on what it is that you said, but I know the part of what has brought you to Nigeria is this conference on journalism, the West African Innovation Journalism Conference, which, you're one of the speakers at the conference. What is now I know that, democracy guarantees freedoms. Part of it is freedom of the press. But in recent times, we've been seeing that, even freedoms are now being questioned. It's like freedom cannot just be limitless. It seems that we're having much more freedoms without responsibilities. And even right now, democracies, even well-established democracies, seem to be in danger. How much more fragile democracies like ours? For you, attending that conference and, the future of journalism, what would you say were your biggest takeaways and things that you would like Nigerians, maybe Africans, to reflect on, even as we continue on this journey?
I think my biggest takeaway, one of my takeaways, is that we need to honor men and women who put their lives on the line to report the news. We need to honor them. We need to respect the work they do. We need to support them. It is not easy in this environment to bring objectivity to issues, to speak for those who cannot speak for themselves, to bring realities that we are not aware of into our living room and help us understand what is happening to our common humanity and the duties we owe to each other. So we need to at least applaud the effort. Is it perfect? No, it's not. Journalism and the media, in my view, is the live wire of democracy. Because if you look at in every country where despots are holding sway, first, they cage the media. Because the power of information is something that energizes the people, empowers the people, and gives them the information and the strength to have a voice. And when they have that voice, the media and the press recognize it and frame the issues around their own opinion. So I think that the media is at the middle of all of this, allowing citizens to be able to speak up, giving them a platform to be heard. And doing that duty requires being objective. Doing that duty requires listening to the least of the crowd. Those who ordinarily will not be heard need to be heard. So it has to be inclusive. It has to be humane. It has to do no harm. So the work of the journalist is to amplify the voice of the people, is to define the issues in an objective way, in a way that allows the society to find the right path. So it is a very important component of democracy. The work of the journalist can save lives and can actually destroy lives. So it imposes a higher level of responsibility on journalists to be able to report these things, do no harm, and give voice to those who can't have voices.
I'll ask you many more questions on our democracy, but we're totally out of time. I'm hoping that you'll be back again in country very soon. Well, we have to thank you very much for coming on Hard Copy.
Thank you for having me.
Well, that's the program tonight. Thank you for the feedback on our last episode. We look forward to hearing from you again on this one. Please use the handles showing on your screen. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Good night.